20 African American recipes shaped the way America eats, yet most people today can't name even 3. They once fed generations, built traditions, and carried stories across centuries. But now they've vanished from kitchens, erased from cookbooks, and buried in history. Which powerful dishes have we lost, and what flavors are missing from our tables today? One of the earliest examples is hoe cakes. Hoe cakes got their name from being cooked on the flat side of a hoe when skillets were nowhere to be found. These cornmeal pancakes fed enslaved Africans and poor farmers with just cornmeal, water, salt, and sometimes bacon grease. You know times are tough when your cooking equipment doubles as farming tools, but these weren't fancy Sunday morning pancakes anyway. Hoe cakes were thick, hearty, and built for survival. The batter was dense enough to stick together over an open fire and filling enough to fuel hours of backbreaking work. These pancakes could be wrapped up and carried to the fields, eaten cold hours later, and still provide needed energy. No refrigeration required, no milk or eggs needed. A hot hoe cake drizzled with molasses could power someone through an entire morning of hard labor. Modern breakfast gets more complicated every year, but hoe cakes prove that sometimes the best fuel comes in the simplest packages. While morning fuel kept people going, certain dishes were designed to bring something even more valuable than energy. Hoppin John combines black-eyed peas, rice, and smoked meat into a dish that supposedly brings good luck when eaten on New Year's Day. This tradition stretches back to West Africa, where cooks had been mixing rice and beans long before anyone thought about American holidays. Nobody knows for sure why it's called Hoppin John. Maybe it was named after someone who limped. Maybe children hopped around the table waiting to eat it. The mystery adds flavor, just like the spices. When enslaved people arrived in America, they adapted their rice and bean techniques to new ingredients. The result was a dish that felt like home while using what was actually available. Black-eyed peas swell when cooked, representing prosperity growing throughout the year. Rice means abundance, grain by grain, blessing by blessing. If eating peas and rice could guarantee good fortune, insurance companies would be serving it at board meetings. Beyond bringing luck once a year, some foods provide daily treasures hidden in unexpected places. Collard greens taught generations that the liquid left after cooking vegetables might be more valuable than the vegetables themselves. That dark, nutrient-packed broth called pot liquor was liquid gold when food was scarce. Fresh collards start tough as leather, but transform completely through slow cooking with smoked meat, onions, and spices. Hours of simmering break down the tough leaves while concentrating their nutrients into the cooking liquid. If vitamins could talk, they'd all be shouting from the bottom of that pot. During the Civil War, when regular food was hard to find, pot liquor kept people alive. This wasn't just flavored water, it was concentrated nutrition. The cooking process became a social event. Waiting for collards to cook properly was like waiting for good gossip. It took time, but the results were always worth it. Everyone agreed on one thing: you never threw away the pot liquor. While vegetables were teaching lessons about hidden value, Sunday dinners were proving that patience could transform ordinary ingredients completely. Smothered pork chops turned potentially tough cuts of meat into Sunday dinner magic through nothing but patience and onion gravy. First, you brown the chops, then you smother them in gravy and let time work its tender magic. Pan-fry pork chops until golden, then put them back in the pan with sliced onions and just enough liquid to create steam. Cover everything, lower the heat, and wait. What started as chewy meat became so tender it practically dissolved when you looked at it. The gravy wasn't an afterthought. It was the whole point. Those brown bits stuck to the pan after frying contained all the flavor. Add onions and let them cook until sweet and golden, then slowly add liquid while scraping up every bit of taste. These pork chops got more attention than most people's children, and the results proved it was worth every minute. Speaking of transformation, there was one cooking method that could make food last for days while staying delicious. Buttermilk fried chicken solved the problem of making fried chicken that stayed crispy and delicious hours after cooking, which mattered enormously before refrigeration existed. The secret wasn't in the frying, it was in the preparation. That tangy buttermilk marinade broke down tough protein fibers, transforming potentially rubbery chicken into something that would melt in your mouth. Pieces soaked for hours, sometimes overnight, in that magical liquid. Buttermilk was like a spa treatment for chicken. It came out relaxed, tender, and ready for anything. The double coating created the real magic. After the buttermilk bath, chicken got dredged in seasoned flour, back into buttermilk, then into flour again. This built multiple layers of protection that formed crispy armor when it hit hot oil. The result was fried chicken that could survive a wagon ride to church and still make people weep with joy. Before cars and coolers, food had to travel well. While chicken was mastering the art of travel, desserts were quietly conquering holiday tables with their own special powers. Sweet potato pie didn't just compete with pumpkin pie for holiday dessert honors. It completely dominated many Southern tables. The secret was in the sweet potatoes themselves, which brought deeper, more complex flavors than pumpkins ever could. Sweet potatoes roasted until caramelized, then mashed smooth, created natural sweetness and richness that pumpkins couldn't match. Add milk, eggs, sugar, and the right spice blend, and you had filling that tasted like autumn concentrated into custard form. Sweet potato pie was basically pumpkin pie's more talented cousin who could actually sing. The texture was creamier, the flavor more complex, and the natural sugars meant you needed less added sweetener. If holiday desserts had a popularity contest, sweet potato pie would have won by a landslide and demanded a recount just to be polite. Different families developed their own spice signatures that reflected personality and tradition. While sweet potatoes were conquering special occasions, everyday leftovers were quietly transforming into their own kind of magic. Rice pudding proved that yesterday's leftovers could become today's dessert with just imagination and patience. Leftover rice that might otherwise go to waste transformed into creamy, satisfying comfort food that warmed both body and soul. Plain rice slowly simmered with milk, sweetened with whatever was available, and spiced with cinnamon or nutmeg. What started as separate ingredients became unified dessert. Rice pudding was like a hug in a bowl, except it actually filled you up instead of just making you feel better about your problems. Before refined sugar became common, rice pudding got sweetened with molasses or sorghum syrup. These natural sweeteners added depth and complexity that regular sugar couldn't match. The best part about rice pudding was that it made yesterday's mistakes taste like today's victories. While rice was becoming dessert, other grains were taking on completely different roles in Southern kitchens. Sorghum molasses bread emerged after the Civil War when this local Southern sweetener became the affordable alternative to expensive sugar. Dense, moist, and naturally sweet, this bread proved that limitation often breeds the most creative solutions. Sorghum syrup wasn't just cheaper than sugar, it was actually better for baking bread. The thick, sticky consistency helped create loaves that stayed moist for days without refrigeration. This bread was more substantial than a tax bill and about as dense. One thick slice could keep you satisfied for hours, making it perfect for people doing physical work all day. After the Civil War, sorghum became widely grown across the South because it was cheap to produce and grew well in challenging conditions. Sorghum molasses bread was basically edible perfume that happened to be nutritious. While bread was filling bellies with substantial sweetness, delicate cookies were making celebrations possible with just a touch of sugar. Tea cakes were soft sugar cookies that made celebrations possible when sugar was expensive and special occasions needed something sweet. These weren't served with tea, and they weren't really cakes. They were pure edible joy stretched as far as limited resources would allow. When refined sugar cost more than most families could afford for regular desserts, tea cakes used just enough sweetness to create something special without breaking the budget. They were like happiness cookies that didn't require happiness budgets. Basic ingredients came together into forgiving, flexible dough. Flour, a little sugar, fat when available, and whatever flavoring could be found created cookies that were soft, slightly chewy, and deeply satisfying. Tea cakes were the original party favors, except they actually tasted good and people wanted seconds. While individual cookies were making small gatherings sweet, there were dishes specifically designed to feed entire communities. Brunswick stew solved the eternal problem of feeding a crowd when nobody had enough of any single ingredient to do the job alone. This thick, hearty stew combined whatever vegetables, beans, and meats were available into something much greater than the sum of its parts. Both Georgia and Virginia claim to have invented Brunswick stew, and honestly, they probably both did. When you need to feed 30 people with whatever's rattling around in the pantry, you don't wait for someone else to write the cookbook. The genius lay in its flexibility. Brunswick stew could include whatever vegetables were in season, whatever meat was available, and whatever beans or grains needed using up. Some versions included wild game like squirrel or rabbit when that's what hunters brought home. Brunswick stew was like a potluck dish that actually knew how to behave itself and taste good at the same time. While communities were creating magic from combined ingredients, individual cooks were discovering treasures in the parts others threw away. Oxtail stew proved that the most flavorful parts of animals often came from the pieces other people threw away. What butchers once considered scraps became the foundation for one of the richest, most satisfying stews ever created. Most people looked at these bony, tough pieces of meat and assumed they were only good for dog food. Oxtail was like the ugly duckling of meat cuts, except it turned into a swan that could make grown adults cry tears of joy. The cooking process demanded pure patience. Oxtail needed hours of slow simmering to break down tough connective tissue and release incredible flavor. Those hours created something magical. Meat so tender, it fell off the bone, and broth so rich, it was almost like liquid velvet. The collagen was nature's secret thickening agent, working better than any artificial additive and probably more honest about its intentions. While oxtail was proving that scraps could become treasures, other throwaway parts were revolutionizing how people thought about seasoning. Smoked turkey necks flipped traditional thinking about meat value completely around. These weren't about getting the most protein per pound. They were about packing maximum flavor into beans, greens, and soups with a single magical ingredient. Turkey necks were what most people discarded after carving the holiday bird, but smoking transformed these throwaway parts into concentrated flavor bombs that could season entire pots of food. One smoked turkey neck could turn a pot of plain beans into a meal that made people question everything they thought they knew about vegetables. Affordability made smoked turkey necks accessible to families on tight budgets. They cost a fraction of what whole turkeys demanded, but delivered more flavor impact per dollar than almost any other ingredient available. These turkey necks were like tiny flavor wizards that worked for minimum wage but delivered maximum results. While mainland cooks were mastering local ingredients, island influences were bringing new flavors across the water. Pigeon pea and rice brought Caribbean sunshine to coastal African American communities through migrants who carried both recipes and ingredients to new homes. This wasn't just food traveling. This was culture creating connections across water and distance. Pigeon peas might sound exotic, but they were practical powerhouses perfectly designed for people who moved frequently. These protein-rich legumes stored well when dried, traveled easily without refrigeration, and provided complete nutrition when combined with rice. They were like edible insurance policies that happened to taste amazing. Caribbean cooks brought more than ingredients. They brought techniques. They knew how to make pigeon peas creamy and rich, how to balance earthy bean flavors with herbs and spices. Coconut milk was basically tropical magic that could make any dish taste like it was prepared by island royalty. From island-influenced dishes, attention turned to the fresh abundance that rivers and streams provided. Catfish fries transformed fishing expeditions into community celebrations where fresh catches became excuses for impromptu parties. This wasn't just about eating fish. This was about turning necessity into social events. Fresh-caught catfish had to be eaten quickly before refrigeration existed, which meant successful fishing trips often became neighborhood gatherings. A successful fishing trip was like winning the lottery, except instead of money, you got an excuse to throw a party. The cornmeal coating was absolutely crucial. Unlike regular flour, cornmeal created distinctive texture that was both crunchy and slightly gritty in the most satisfying possible way. These fish were basically nature's answer to the question of what would happen if you crossed durability with deliciousness. While whole fish were becoming community celebrations, some cooks were making sure absolutely nothing went to waste. Fish head stew embodied the principle that smart cooks waste nothing while flavoring everything they possibly can. What looked like scraps to inexperienced cooks became the foundation for rich, complex stews that maximized both nutrition and taste. The whole fish went into the pot. Heads, bones, tails, everything. Fish heads were like flavor treasure chests that most people threw away without opening. Cheeks, collars, cartilage all contributed flavors that regular fillets couldn't match. When your livelihood depended on unpredictable waters, throwing away edible parts wasn't just wasteful, it was potentially dangerous. The cooking process was like magic that turned fish bones into liquid gold. Fish head stew was proof that the best treasures were often hidden in the most unlikely places. Speaking of understanding ingredients, there was one preparation that took the concept of using everything to its absolute limit. Chitlins, thoroughly cleaned pig intestines, represented the ultimate transformation of what most people considered completely inedible into legitimate feast food through hours of patient preparation and extremely careful cooking. The cleaning process alone could consume entire afternoons. Chitlins required thorough scrubbing, turning inside out, more scrubbing, and multiple inspections to ensure perfect cleanliness. Cleaning chitlins was like preparing for surgery, except the patient was your dinner and the steaks were everyone's appetite. Traditional preparation happened during winter hog butchering season when families processed entire pigs and absolutely nothing could go to waste. Chitlins needed more cooking time than most people's attention spans, but the results were worth every minute of waiting. While some foods demanded complex preparation, others celebrated the simple joy of bright, refreshing flavors. Red drink connects modern celebrations directly back to West African hibiscus-based beverages through bright, sweet flavors that symbolize joy, strength, and community unity. This isn't just colored sugar water, this is liquid tradition. The West African roots run deep through hibiscus flowers that created naturally red, tart beverages long before anyone thought about artificial coloring. Red drink became the official beverage of good times, showing up at celebrations like a liquid party invitation. The flavor could come from various sources. Hibiscus flowers created authentic tartness when available. Strawberry, cherry, or other red fruit flavors worked when hibiscus wasn't accessible. Red drink was basically happiness in a cup, except it actually quenched your thirst while lifting your spirits. While liquid refreshment celebrated community gatherings, there were frozen treats that turned simple ingredients into summer magic. Homemade ice cream required serious arm strength and community effort to hand-churn wooden buckets filled with ice and salt until cream became frozen perfection. This was dessert that demanded physical labor but rewarded everyone involved with results no store could match. The basic mixture was simple: milk, sugar, eggs, and flavorings combined into rich custard base. But the magic happened in the churning process, where constant stirring prevented large ice crystals from forming. Making ice cream was like a delicious workout that actually had worthwhile results at the end. Church socials and summer gatherings often featured ice cream making as entertainment and dessert combined. Ice cream making was basically a party where everyone worked for their dessert, but nobody complained because the payoff was so sweet. From frozen summer treats, kitchens explored how familiar ingredients could create completely unexpected flavors. Peanut soup brought West African groundnut soup traditions directly to Virginia kitchens, where this creamy, savory dish became proof that peanuts belonged in more than just sandwiches and ballpark snacks. When enslaved people arrived in America, they recognized peanuts as close relatives to the groundnuts they knew and adapted familiar soup-making techniques. Peanut soup was basically liquid comfort food that happened to be packed with protein. The preparation involved roasting peanuts until fragrant, grinding them into smooth paste, then slowly cooking them with vegetables and broth until everything melded into rich, creamy soup. Peanut soup proved that sometimes the most surprising combinations create the most satisfying results. While soups were exploring savory possibilities, the same nuts were creating sweet endings that could last for weeks. Peanut brittle transformed simple peanuts into hard candy that could last for weeks without spoiling, making it the perfect sweet treat for holidays when storage mattered as much as taste. This candy required precise timing and fearless handling of extremely hot sugar syrup. The process involved cooking sugar and butter until it reached the hard crack stage, quickly stirring in roasted peanuts, then pouring everything onto greased surfaces. Making peanut brittle was like controlled kitchen chemistry, where timing meant the difference between candy and disaster. The holiday connection made perfect sense. Peanut brittle stored beautifully in airtight containers, staying crispy and fresh for weeks when properly made. Peanut brittle was basically edible amber that preserved sweetness instead of ancient insects. These 20 recipes prove that the most important cooking lessons come from understanding how to create something extraordinary from whatever ingredients life provides you.